God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause he hung up on that cross, and he rose up from that grave. My God still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. He won't be quiet. We shout your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. He won't be quiet. We shout your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We were forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We were forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. Shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in this house today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise.
God, we know that all good things come from you. You created the gifts we cherish, including the gift of time. We want to be generous with this gift as you have been generous with us. But God, why is there never enough? We're pretty worried we won't have time to get everything done. We're not sure how we could possibly do one more thing. Teach us to relax, God. Grow our faith. You give us gifts, knowing we will learn to share them with others. Teach us to listen for you in this moment and for all time yet to come. Amen. There's a season for everything, and a time for every matter under the heavens. A time for giving birth and a time for dying. A time for planting and a time for uprooting what was planted. A time for killing and a time for healing. A time for tearing down and a time for building up. A time for crying and a time for laughing. A time for mourning and a time for dancing. A time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones. A time for embracing and a time for avoiding embraces. A time for searching and a time for losing. A time for keeping and a time for throwing away. A time for tearing and a time for repairing. A time for keeping silent and a time for speaking. A time for loving and a time for hating. A time for war and a time for peace.
Much of the time, it feels like our lives are full of chaos. Many of us have felt that way this week, but according to Ecclesiastes, there is a God-given rhythm and order to our lives. Even when horrific things happen that we struggle to accept, let alone understand, God brings the sun up in the morning, gardens grow, and seasons change. When we feel like what we're doing is meaningless in the face of greater realities we can't control, when our life is suddenly altered so that Plans we carefully made don't matter anymore. God stands ready to offer us a rhythm and a home, a place to remain as long as we need, and then a place from which to begin. All things, our history and the natural world, move in cycles, which we'd think would help to predict the experiences of our lives. But the writer of Ecclesiastes points out it doesn't work like that. What we can predict and be sure of is that without God, there's no meaning or purpose. This little book of wisdom literature has had an outsized influence on popular literature, music, and culture. Phrases woven into our lives like eat, drink, and be merry, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There's nothing new under the sun, a phrase which appears 29 times in the book. Scholars disagree about the themes that we find there. Is it positive and life-affirming or despairing, coherent or incoherent, insightful or confused, orthodox or unorthodox? Are we trying to avoid its author's mistakes or emulate his life? Absent in this Hebrew Bible text is the concept of resurrection, but it's almost like the book cries out for the concept of resurrection so that hope and faith and a desire for continued forward movement can exist. At times, the writer raises deep questions that contradict other biblical truths. Is it written in the style of a journal, cataloging a quest for truth? Is the purpose to inspire deep reflection and further conversation? Ecclesiastes was nearly excluded from the canon of Scripture because of what seems like so many contradictions and a lack of consensus around who wrote it and what it means. The subject matter being tackled here is what I would call, if you think about downhill skiing, double black diamond material. The distortions and inequities of the world and the pain and frustration they cause, the uselessness of human ambition, the limitation of worldly wisdom and righteousness, also resolute faithfulness in a powerful God who retains the right to unpredictability. The author is referred to as Kohelet, meaning someone who addresses an assembly, a teacher or preacher. Traditionally, Ecclesiastes is understood to have been written by King Solomon before his death, but the timing doesn't really match up for that to have been the case. King Solomon's life seems to predate the text. Whoever this teacher was, he was a skilled communicator. I'm working on my presentation about the Emerge project for later this month in South Dakota at Dakota Wesleyan University. And my coach wants me to include something he calls value-based selling, VBS, the other VBS. That when you write a presentation, you begin with a grabber, a shocking or bold statement. In Ecclesiastes, the bold statement in chapter 1 is kind of a riddle of despair. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher in the beginning. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Well, I'm not sure who would have signed up to hear this message. Frustration and adversity are unavoidable. There are no answers, at least none that you're going to like, to the hard questions of life. By the time he gets to chapter 7, the author is ready to advise a moderate course of action. Since life brings us good times and horrific times, since nobody can discover anything about their future, and life follows no discernible pattern, but we know that all good things come from the God who never abandons us, try this sensible course of action. When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. We know that we are shaped through the hellfire of adversity and pain. Nobody wants to talk about it, but we identify with the suffering that is articulated in this book, and we can admit that trouble, when it finds us, shapes us like nothing else. In the book In Good Time, the author, Michael, observes something about God's timeline. She writes, God makes a promise and then asks us to wait for it. God minds waiting less than we do. God is comfortable growing something slowly, nearly imperceptibly. We don't like uncertainty, and while we're waiting around, we are convinced that we are abandoned. I used to think that. We used to take the boys to a large pediatric practice, and we would get into an examining room and be told that the doctor would be in soon. And then sometimes an hour or 90 minutes would go by, and I would convince myself that everyone had gone home and the staff had forgotten we were still waiting there in the room. We live in a culture that is running fast and hard to overcome the realities that we're speaking about. Someone might say, what do you mean that my package that was supposed to arrive today isn't coming until tomorrow? We all want what we want as fast as we can figure out that we want it. That feels chaotic to me. But God stands outside of time while we do not. Our endurance can be an expression of faithful waiting. Michael says endurance is the capacity to wait and to wait it out, to remain, to rest, persevere, and abide. Waiting is standing firm. Waiting is a furnace of endurance. It may seem unproductive, but it is the careful cultivation of a vineyard. It is worth mentioning a word of caution here, though. The other side of the coin or riddle that we've been handling today, there is a season for all things, and only God is in control of the changing of seasons. However, Martin Luther King notes in his letter from the Birmingham jail, there comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over. There comes a time when enough waiting is enough. When justice too long delayed is justice denied. When patience is exhausted, it is time to speak up. How might we wait well? How might we discern when the time for patient, faithful waiting is long over? We might consider lifting up the habit of practice. Steady commitment even when we don't feel like it. Perhaps time isn't the right word for the gift that we're given. Maybe that word ought to be attention. People are talking now about our attentional economy. To give our attention is to notice, to name. We create rules for our practice, but for our attention and for our calendars in hopes of achieving the life balance that we hear about. Wisdom is learned and practiced. We know that practice can regulate our spiritual formation and focus. We also know that distraction is not a modern phenomenon, but it is a huge hurdle in the habit of developing practice. What happens when we can't be bothered to practice? We lose our balance. We lose our rhythm. One habit or practice to develop, according to Cal Newport, is to do fewer things. Think about eating one meal at a time, rather than feeling as if for dinner tonight we'll be sampling every meal we've ever eaten at this table. Communion, after all, is always the same bread and cup, one meal at a time. Newport challenges us to strive to reduce our obligations to the point where we can easily imagine accomplishing them with time to spare. Can you imagine? We might think about it by asking, how many beach towels is too many for one load of laundry? You can put them all in there, but they won't spin right, and they'll never dry. Try doing smaller loads, more of them, but you'll get a better result. A closing observation from American novelist Thomas Wolfe. Of all I have ever seen or learned, the book of Ecclesiastes seems to me the noblest, the wisest, and the most powerful expression of man's life upon this earth, and also the highest flower of poetry, eloquence, and truth. I am not given to dogmatic judgments in the matter of literacy creation, but if I had to make one, I could say that Ecclesiastes is the greatest single piece of writing I have ever known, and the wisdom expressed in it the most lasting and profound.
We hope you're enjoying Podchurch. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and be notified each time there's a new video. To learn more about everything that's happening in and around Marquette Hope, check out our Facebook page. You can also get our newsletter on the Facebook as well. Podchurch is the weekly online worship of Marquette Hope, a United Methodist faith community located in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Find us at facebook.com/mqthope, mqthope.com, and on